Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by a large thing in a mat suit. It's Tack Freeman. How's it going today, Tack?
Sugar in water.
Such a good impression. Oh my god. That's D'Onofrio, right?
That's D'Onofrio in his best role.
Which is no small feat for that to be his best role.
Indeed. It's definitely his most fun role.
This week, our 11-part coverage of Stephen King's Desperation continues as we cover chapters 3 through 5 of part 2 of the novel. With the help of David's crack shot, the prisoners manage to escape their cells and head out into Desperation in search of somewhere to hide. Meanwhile, after Steve and Cynthia get hot and heavy with their sex toy wolf statue thing, they run into another survivor of Intrigian and head up to meet with the others at the local theater. Oh, also, Ellie Carver is back. Sort of.
Yay.
Matt, what'd you think of this week's reading?
Oh, this is great. A ton of stuff happened in here. I will say that despite the fact that we talked very particularly about the fact that the chapter ordering and numbers was all screwed up, I still got lost and read not enough chapters and had to rush to catch up. It was all fine in the end, of course. I have read all of the reading, but I thought it was funny how we specifically talked about this and it still confused me. Still confused me so badly that I almost failed.
This is why you were in the spreadsheet. This is good. This is like I was working in the spreadsheet the other day and I saw your little Google circle appear. I was like, oh, Matt's in the spreadsheet.
I do use the spreadsheet. How the hell else would I figure out what I'm supposed to read?
I don't know. You listen to me when I say it every week?
Yeah, but that only lasts for like a second and I can't like go back and check.
Well, I'm glad you read the correct number of chapters and I'm glad you're enjoying them.
Yeah.
I want to be fully transparent at the start of this episode here. I am not loving this book on this reread.
Okay.
I'm liking it a lot. I do like it. And I almost enjoy talking about it with you more than I enjoy reading it. And I was thinking, and this is really the only part of this show that I'm going to spend on this. And then I want to talk about the book and the things it's doing as we normally do. But I thought in the interest of honesty, I would open with this week. I'm having a lot of trouble connecting to some of the characters this time around. Like, I think there's the characters that I really like David and like Johnny. But the rest of the characters, I feel like just kind of like are there a lot of the times for me. Like I think Tom Billingsly gets a little more interesting this week. I think we get some Mary stuff that is sort of interesting. But I'm just having a trouble connecting to the characters outside of those two main ones, and sometimes it feels like they just disappear in a scene, like Ralph. Carver like is there at some points in scenes and then like sometimes he's gone and he's just like the book has kind of lost track of him. He's like so reserved and in the background that he almost just disappears. And I think that's what's causing me to like not like be like I said, I'm still enjoying the book but not like head over heels in love with it like I normally am.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think I've been enjoying it quite a bit. I will say that I agree with some of your specific comments there along the lines of losing track of characters. I'm having the damnedest time keeping track of character names, which is interestingly not that unusual for me in general, but somewhat unusual for me in a Stephen King novel. Usually he really makes the characters super distinct and then hammers in the names. And I have to say, like, if you had quizzed me on like which of the women is Ellie and which of the women is Mary, I'd just be like, they're the two women. they're the two of them. Yeah. So which isn't to say that I couldn't puzzle it out, But anyway, I think it's this sort of story is the word apocalypse is used in this week's reading.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of like post-apocalypse fiction or like zombie horror fiction where you find, your ragtag group of characters after some horribly traumatic event has happened and you haven't really had time to get to know them. and there is a risk that the characters tend to bleed together when you do that. Um, and I kind of feel like that's happening a bit. But generally, I mean, so much crazy stuff is happening in the story at a pretty good clip,
Mhm.
that I've had a hard time really being bothered by the fact that I can't keep the characters straight too well.
Yeah, no, I totally see where you come from there, and I get that. I think one of the things for me, because I was thinking about this a lot, because whenever I'm not enjoying something as much, I immediately become curious as to the why. I think this is like a one of the King novels, perhaps, in which the kind of central mystery of like what's going on and what's happening is almost like more alluring than some of the characters, which I think is a difference for King. For
Mhm.
sure. I think like he normally writes, he has these great conceits, these great setups, but it's the characters that you really get in for. But you know, this is a book in which like what's going on here, what's happened, what happened in Desperation, like why is this guy killing people, why are these people not being killed, like all these things, all these big questions are a big draw and pull of the novel, and of course those are things that I already know the answers to, right?
Mhm.
And so if all the characters aren't working on me as well, and the main draw of the novel is something that I already know about, then this reread, maybe that's the answer for why I'm just not as just head over heels with this one this time.
Yeah, I think there's it's entirely possible. Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to voice that I'm still like really excited to talk to you about it, because there's still stuff in here that's like really, really interesting and really fun to talk about, especially this week. So it's definitely not like, it's not hurting my enjoyment of making the show for sure. It's
Mhm.
just like, I think this past week when I sat down to read it, like I just felt my mind wandering a bit more than it does when I'm sitting down to read King, especially for the show when I'm so attentively like highlighting and taking notes and doing these things. I was just, it took a little longer this time, and I was trying to figure out why.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. All right, let's get into it this week. Before we do that, though, a couple quick, really super, super quick announcements. The big one, Matt, is that we have released our latest and last episode of our Patreon exclusive bonus show we called Other Levels of the Tower. We took a look at Creep Show 2. And after we finished that movie, we kind of both looked at each other and said, I think we're good. I
Yeah.
think we're, I think we're good with this.
I think that's all the good ones.
Yeah. So we are kind of shelving that show, that concept. It went on for 3 years and 37 episodes, which feels like enough time. We're not done with the bonus content that Matt, do we want to announce it here, what we're doing next? I guess we
Yeah.
should, huh?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So starting in January, instead of doing Other Levels of the Tower each month, we are going to be taking a look at the Hulu original series Castle Rock. It is a 2-season, 10 episodes per season show, and each month our bonus episode will take a look at 2 of the episodes. So this is a thing that we're going to plan to run through the majority of 2024, but we're going to take some time with the show that I have seen before and Matt has not. So it's going to be like the format of the show you're listening to right now. It's a fun show. I think there's going to be a lot of fun stuff to talk about here, Matt, and I'm pretty excited. I'm just excited to do something new-ish, but still in the vein of what we've been doing with these bonus shows the whole time.
Yeah, organize a little bit differently. Probably
Mhm.
less episodes where we're like, "Wow, this was a real stinker." Um, which yeah, they're fun in their own way, but
Yeah.
I look
Mhm.
forward to kind of making our way through a larger body of fiction.
Yeah, and I look forward to really analyzing this thing too, because yeah, as I said, I've watched it before, and there's quite a bit that I enjoyed in it, but I never really sat down to think about it that much. So
Mhm.
hopefully we get to do some of that over these next few months.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so that's going to start in January, in our normal mid-month bonus podcast release window there. So if you haven't listened to the Creep Show 2 episode, now's a great time. If you haven't joined Patreon yet, but have heard about those other levels of the tower thing, those 37 episodes aren't going anywhere. They're still going to be there for you forever, as long as you're a patron. And then these will be new things to come along, and we can chat about Castle Rock. We said on the show we're going to need to come up with a name for this thing, and we haven't yet.
No.
So we're gonna keep working on that.
Yeah, it's going to be good though. It's going to be a
It's
great
gonna be
name.
just the best name we've ever come up with ever.
That's right.
We also just quickly wanted to remind folks that our merch store is still up. We have passed the drop date for if you wanted to order something and get it guaranteed before Christmas, but some people like late Christmas presents.
Yeah. And you still might get it by Christmas. I mean,
True.
it all depends. It's
Yeah.
just depends on the item you order, I think, because different items take different amounts of time to create. So once
Yeah.
again, head on over to doofmedia.myshopify.com and check out the selection. There's so much cool stuff over there. Some really cool designs. Just a fairly wide variety of designs actually is the thing that I'm most excited and happy about. So
Yeah.
at least look it over for us. That would be great.
My wife was looking at the stuff today and she's like, I really like the Kingslinger zip up hoodie. It's got this really cool design on the back of it that Jody put together, a podcast journey to the Dark Tower and beyond. She's like, it's a really cool design and I really want it, but I haven't read the book, so I feel like I'm not allowed to wear this. I'm like, no, wrong, incorrect.
Yeah.
You do whatever you want.
You can do whatever you want.
Also, thank you to my in-law for purchasing as a Christmas gift to me something from my store.
That's great.
Maybe they did not realize that we get the emails when people purchase things, and I get
Perhaps not.
No, it's delightfully sweet, and they don't listen to the show, so they're not going to hear this. But I thought that was really funny. Yeah. It's like I win twice, Matt. I win because I get this cool new merch and a little bit of profit on top of that.
It's perfect. It's a great deal.
So yeah, once again, the link to that store will be in the show notes. Check it out. This is a lot of cool stuff. I'm using one of my Kingslingers mugs that I got right now. It's great. It's great stuff. I'm very happy with the quality. You know, that's always kind of something you're scared of when you do these online shops and you're just like, hey, print this thing and send it to people. I hope it's good quality. So far, everything I've gotten has been outstanding quality, and I'm very impressed with. So
yeah, we did look into that as much as we could.
Yeah, and if you want to share your podcast me mugs with us on the social media, please do. We've gotten some tagged in some pictures of people posting them sitting with their mugs, and I immediately go to the comments and see if there's people saying, what does that mean?
That's wonderful. I haven't noticed that. I'll check the socials and look at those.
Keep them coming, please. It's great. It's great. All right, Matt, let's get into our show. Let's talk about Desperation. As we said, this week we are covering chapters 3 through 5 of part 2, the conclusion of part 2, and we begin with chapter 3. We start this week with Mary Jackson still stuck in prison. This is the kind of observation I think, Matt, that comes from just tackling the book the way we're doing in this very slow, specific, deliberate kind of way. But doesn't it feel just like fucking forever since we've given any attention to poor Mary Jackson? Like she like her husband and her encounter with Kali and Trajan like is what kicked off the novel. It's the inciting incident of the novel. But then he died and she was kind of mostly relegated to the background, and we just haven't hung out with her very much lately. So it's a welcome return to this character.
It is, yeah. And you know, we haven't gotten zero from her. We've seen her in the background. We've seen that she's a bit more hard-nosed than you know, well, I guess that's just her character type. She has more of that gunslinger streak than maybe than her husband did, let's say. I don't know. She definitely seemed to have some backbone even back when they were being, you know, kidnapped by Trajan. I
agree.
I also really enjoy how mad she is at her sister-in-law. I just thought it was fun.
Yeah, that's one thing I wanted to talk to you about specifically, because I think there is a lot of stuff happening in this whole book, but maybe especially in these chapters here around this concept of blame and whose fault it is for them to be in the situation they're in. Like we see in this moment, Mary is blaming her sister-in-law for you know, storing the drugs in her car, which is what got them arrested. And she kind of knows at the same time that it's not really her sister-in-law's fault. And I think Johnny does a similar thing a little bit later that we're going to talk about when he blames his ex-wife for him being in this situation. And it just got me thinking, you know, in the lens of what we're doing with this book and the God stuff and the religion stuff and the idea of, you know, how we react to the bad things that happen to us every day, like how you look for blame usually outside of yourself, and just the idea of like, what the fuck, God? Like
Hmm.
the idea of like, if you're the type of person that believes in these powerful gods, whatever, and then something bad happens to you, it's like, oh man, what the hell? And this idea of, you know, when good things happen to us, our natural reaction is to kind of go like, hell yeah, I
Hmm.
deserved that. I earned that. But when bad things happen to us, our initial reaction is to go, what, why did someone do this to me?
Hmm.
Like, who did this to me? Who can I blame for this? Whether it be God, someone else. Like, I don't know. I just think we're kind of, there's several instances in this book where we're talking about how we blame, what we look at, what our reaction to badness happening is.
Yeah, I think that's something the book is very much concerned with. I think that's basically, you could view that as being part of the machinery of faith,
Mm-hmm.
because it's one thing to say that you have faith in God, but if that faith is essentially dependent on things going well for you,
Mm-hmm.
then it's like, well, is that really faith, or is that really the kind of strong faith that is actually demanded? um and I mean, I think the answer is clearly no, at least in Stephen King's cosmology. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of, your faith has to be so pure that it is actually irrational, that it is actually kind of insane,
Mm-hmm.
in order to be sufficiently pure, like, because yeah, it's one thing. I'm going to skip ahead of just a second here and say, like, it's one thing for Johnny to say, like, oh yeah, man, I'm going to get down on my knees and pray next to this kid because look at the results.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, okay, well, sure. When you're winning, of course, everybody wants to get down on their knees and pray next to you.
Yeah, right.
Uh, that's definitely not always the case, especially within Stephen King novels. It's not the case that the servants of the white just like can't, they just can't stop winning, right? It's like, maybe they'll survive, but that doesn't necessarily even mean that they survive unscathed, and often they don't survive. So,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
No, I like that. The idea that faith is not just for when you're being granted magical powers to defeat evil.
yeah,
It's when that evil seems to be defeating you.
right,
I think we've said this before, but the idea that faith isn't faith until it's tested in a lot of ways.
yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's very much here. I mean, and so you were talking about blame specifically, and yeah, even last week we were talking about the idea that David sort of mentally starts to blame his father for what has happened to them, and if I remember correctly, God basically tells him to cut it out directly,
Yeah.
and it's like a moment of just affirming, like, yeah, we don't do that, we don't go down that road, we don't lash out, we turn the other cheek, etc. And then yeah,
Yeah.
he gets over it, and he's just kind of keeping his eyes focused on the next step, what needs to be
Yeah.
done.
No, I like that. I like that. And this whole idea of God is cruel, I think slots pretty nicely into this conversation as well, because it's almost as if to say like, you read these stories, especially these Old Testament stories, and you look at God's behavior and you go, man, that's really fucked up. This guy seems mean. He's
Hmm.
really cruel. And the response is, yeah. So it's like the minister is like, yeah, I mean, this is just true, but like blaming God for the things that happen doesn't do you any good. Like, sure, you can like raise your fist to the sky and go, why I oughta, you God,
Yeah,
but what does that do? It doesn't do anything. It's like, yeah,
right.
God's cruel, to deal with it. That doesn't make him less real in the context of the story.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't know, I like it. I like it.
Yep. I think we're on the right track, and I think that
Hmm.
that things will continue to sort of unspool for us as we go.
Yeah. And I like this statement from Mary in line with this conversation we're having here. It says, it was the license plate, not the pot. That's why Trajan stopped you. In a way, it was like the angel of death seeing a doorway without the right mark on it. If the dope hadn't been there, he would have found something else. Once you caught his eye, you were cooked. That's all. And you know it. But you didn't want to know it. thinking of it that way as some sort of weird natural disaster was just too awful. This is, I think, fits pretty nicely into what we were just talking about, right? Just like that last sentence really got me, is like thinking of it that way as some sort of weird natural disaster was just too awful. This is the natural intent of any human, to look at bad things that happen and desperately need to find purpose in them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like just like this had to have happened for a reason. Like there's not like needless, senseless cruelty cannot exist. It's too awful to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And so we must find someone to blame. We must find something to look towards. Some there has to be some reason for everything.
Yeah, as far as I can remember, the word "ka" hasn't come up in the book so far, but
Mm.
definitely this paragraph that you just read struck me as being such a clarifying paragraph when it comes to thinking about ka, because that the whole idea there is like you can rage and you can shake your fist at the sky, but sometimes it's just like your number's up. There's
Yeah.
nothing. It's not your fault even. It's nothing you did that was blameworthy, other than just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And there's no grand explanation for why this is happening to you that will feel just or meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
It's just ka, and it's here now, and that's it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I even love that in the concept of a world in which these things exist, right? That God exists, and in the story, and the white exists, and all these things exist, and so you could even say like this is a world that it seems like I think David reasons this earlier when talking, or a little bit later in the book when talking to Johnny, that you were chosen, right? It's like a world in which a book, a story in which things do happen for reasons, and there are reasons for all these things. But even within this world, is there a reason for why you, Mary, are here now? Why Peter was taken from you here now? Well, maybe not. Maybe not.
Mhm.
Even within that world, there's not a good reason that's going to satisfy you.
Right. Right.
I also just like the detail of her, the angel of death seeing a doorway without the right mark on it. That's a Passover reference. It
Mhm.
is not the last one we get this week. David will make this same reference later in the book. Just once again showing, like, I've been seeing it everywhere, the ways in which like Christian like talk just invades every one of these characters, even and especially the ones that don't seem to have any real like religious allegiance to anything. It's so the imagery, the words, it's just so pervasive in our culture that it's just everywhere, and I think King's doing that very intentionally.
Yeah, I think he's emphasizing it, but what's funny is he's not overemphasizing it much, because it is just true
Yeah.
that this is the way that we talk and think
Yep.
constantly.
Yep.
I mean, we make so many Bible references in the course of just discussing normal books that we don't even like consciously realize.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
yeah. It's the same with Shakespeare. But it's
yeah,
God and Shakespeare are the two things that invade our language without us even realizing it.
yeah,
Maybe they're the same thing.
yeah,
There you go. I said it. Shakespeare is God.
yeah,
Shakespeare is my God.
yeah.
So David returns with the gun, saying he's going to open the door and shoot the guard coyote, freeing them. Ralph originally forbids him from doing this, but is talked into sense by both Mary and Johnny. And in this moment, the cool thing that happens here, Matt, and I really like this actually. Very casually, it's revealed that Mary not only recognizes Johnny Marinville as this very famous author, but is perhaps like a fan in some way. Like she's definitely read some of his novels. I love how she describes one of his books as the dirtiest book of the century. which is interesting because the way Marinville was set up in his mind, and the way he talks about himself, you don't you see him as like the literary type, right?
Yeah,
He writes, he doesn't write smut, he doesn't write genre, he writes literature.
yeah,
And then we have Mary describe his book as the dirtiest book of the 21st or the 20th century. And I think this proves your hypothesis once and for all, Matt, that the key to being literature is just weird sex stuff.
yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's by the way, this book, of course, is literature.
Yeah, because it has so much weird sex stuff. Yeah.
And I think King knows that, and that's why he
Hmm.
put it in there. Yeah, no, I do think it's very funny. Once again, whenever we get an external sort of objective, unconcerned eye upon Johnny Manville,
Yeah.
he doesn't look anything like the way that he looks to himself. He thinks of
Hmm.
himself as this Hemingway-like figure, and he's perceived by one of his readers as basically a smut writer.
Yep. Yep. Great stuff. And
Yeah.
like, I think that is some of the most fun we're having with this book, is that because we meet all these characters independently of each other and separately of each other, we are allowed to exist in the world and the image of themselves that they create. And then we kind of get to dismantle that bit by bit. And like, so much of the chapters this week are filled with Mary, like, incisively looking at this guy and just like picking him apart and just being like, I know exactly what makes this guy tick. I get it. And here's all the ways in which he sucks. And I know exactly what he's thinking, because he sucks in very predictable ways. I really like that stuff.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So David opens the door and performs beautifully here, Matt. He nails the coyote with 2 shots to the chest. We talked about it already, but I do really like this moment where Johnny's reaction to this is, I'd even get down on my knees with him at bedtime. Shit, anybody would. Look at the results. And I love this idea of like evangelism in religion, right? Like this is kind of the purest Old Testament idea of the concept of evangelism. Like, what David is doing here essentially is realizing what the point of the Daniel in the Lion's Den story is. The point of that story is for a character to go through a impossible trial and tribulation, and then so awe the people around him that they just are just like, behold the power of God, right? Like, the
Right.
power of God, the power of innocency, the power of loyalty. Behold, behold, behold. And like, that is essentially what David is doing here. And I've heard this described in modern times as just like, a lot of evangelism in modern times is people like going around constantly talking to people about Jesus. So like, hey, have you heard about Jesus? Let's talk about Jesus. But I have heard different people talk about it as just like, one way of doing it is just living your life according to this belief system. Is like, I will show you how it makes me happier and makes me stronger and makes me like better equipped for the trials and tribulations of life. And just by doing that, you will look at me and see like, wow, look at this person. Like, how are you so happy? How are you so just being this shining example. And that is, I think, what what David is kind of encapsulating here, or meant to encapsulate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, because in particular, the facet that David isn't he's not bragging about the fact that God is helping him. He's
Yeah.
not telling the rest of them like, you should all pray. You
Yeah,
should
you
all
should
pray
be
with
praying
me.
right now. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
No,
Look at my God. You should pray to him. No,
he
he's just leading by example.
he just does it. And then when they ask like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm praying to God, and he's telling me what to do, and it's working. But make of that what you will, folks.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be over here saving your lives. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do still like what you said earlier about this idea that, yeah, well, it's easy to be like, hell yeah, I want to get to know this God dude when he's hooking me up. It's a lot more difficult to be like, hey, I want to get to know this dude when he's shitting all over me, which we've seen textually in this book he does and is gonna do. That God
Right.
is cruel, and these things are going to happen that are bad, and you're gonna have to deal with them. And yeah, I mean, it's just, there's a lot like being kind of picked and explored and prodded with just the concept of faith and religion and spirituality and all these things. That's why we keep talking about them, because
Right.
it's not just that the book is presenting them as this is a trait of this character. To me, this is a book that's presenting them and then saying, so think about that. Think about that a little bit. What does that mean to you? How do you react to that, reader? And that's why it's interesting to me.
Yeah, and there's all these different ways that the different characters react or interact with faith in their own way, and
yeah,
there's kind of something here for everyone if you think about it.
So David unlocks the bars, and our characters are free. And we get this moment. Ralph stepped out and swept his son into his arms, this time with no bars between them. And when David kissed the puffy place on the left side of his father's face, Ralph Carver cried out in pain and laughed at the same time. Johnny thought it one of the most extraordinary sounds he had ever heard in his life, and one you could never convey in a book. The quality of it, like the expression on Ralph Carver's face as he looked into his son's face, would always be just out of reach. I always just kind of get a kick out of any moment in a book when a character's like, you could never convey this in a book.
Right. No, I had the same thought. But I mean, and I think it's especially funny that it's Johnny, the writer, who's perceiving and framing it this way. And it's, it's not the objective narrative voice, it's Johnny. And Johnny specifically is saying, you could never convey this in a book, while of course conveying it from inside a book.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's a good question. Is Johnny a good writer, Matt? From what we've seen, is Johnny a good writer?
That's really interesting. I mean, I think I was sort of thinking of him as being like Stephen King in this way, where he wants to be taken seriously in a very particular way.
Mm-hmm.
And he may be famous, he may be popular, he may be beloved among a certain set of people. None of this is quite what he wanted, or quite how he sees himself. He sort of feels like a disappointment to himself, even though he is this, famous, rich author.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is he a good writer? It's like, well, he seems like he's a writer that a lot of people like, but it doesn't seem like he's achieved what he wants to achieve.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I think it gets down to like, sort of deconstructing the question of like, well, what is it? What is a good writer even? Is Stephen King a good writer? It's like, well, what a blasphemous question to ask on this podcast. But like Stephen King himself, like seems to struggle with the idea of like people tending to think of him as this like genre horror pulp writer. And I think you and I think that he's elevated beyond that, but I don't know if I think he feels a degree of the way that Johnny feels, actually.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great way to approach this thing. Is the objective question of, is Johnny Merivale a good writer, is almost immaterial. The point is, how does he perceive himself? And looking at this beautiful moment and just kind of throwing his hands up in the air of just like, I could never ever in my life properly express the power and import of this moment, is a reflection on how he feels about his skills as a writer, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So released from jail, the group heads back downstairs to collect some more guns and ammo. And of course, Mary finds the corpse of her husband, Peter. Johnny helps comfort her as she freaks out. And then we get this, Matt. And here was another disgusting little facet of the experience. He was becoming aroused by Mary Jackson. She was quivering in the circle of his arm. He could feel the softness of her breast just about his hand, and he wanted her. Her husband was hung up like a fucking overcoat right behind them, but he was still getting a fairly respectable stiffy, especially for a man with possible prostate woes. I love this because, it is filled with this disgust that you have for this moment. And then also Johnny's disgust of himself, right? Like this is from his point of view, and he's disgusted with himself that he's feeling this way. But I also think this is really interesting because it could just be another like, look at this asshole that even acknowledges that he's an asshole. But I think taking this and combining it with what happens between Steve and Cynthia later in the book, where we kind of start very specifically looking at the concept of lust, it seems to be, we're pinging off these ideas a little bit here. And so it gets you to think about it on maybe a different level than just, hey, look at this asshole.
Yeah. I mean, that was my thought, partially because we're analyzing the shit out of all this, but I basically was like, yeah, he gets weirded out when he steps over the dead body earlier and immediately thinks like, hey, this reminds me of sexy times that I had at a party. And then he's feeling aroused here. And it's like, yeah, for whatever for whatever reason, for whatever magical reason, his libido button is being pressed. Um, Likely having to do with all of the magic juju in the statue and so forth. Although he hasn't interacted with the statue, I think that it almost feels like there's like statue energy sort of like flowing through the place regardless.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good thought. This idea, we have these things that exist that are channeling these ideas of lust and sex and violence, and maybe they don't need to be tangibly in front of the characters for that to just be this like overall hum of something going on here.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly enough magic flying around that it's causing the animals to act weird.
Sure.
So I just sort of think of it as like there's a magical event happening in this area. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
I mean, for all we know, the storm itself is magical. There's no proof that it is, but it doesn't quite feel like a natural storm in some ways.
Yeah. So Johnny finds a collection of guns in the police chief's closet, along with, by the way, another body that has her eyes removed. And we also get to see what Intragian has done to the fire chief, which is basically like impaling him on a golf club.
Like end to end, though.
Yeah, like all the way up in and through. Yikes.
Yeah.
It's like, obviously, like, I think something that perhaps gets lost a little bit in, when you're sitting down trying to have an intellectual conversation about this book and about faith and about belief and about the cruelty of God, we just like lose sight of the fact that we don't say the words, this book is fucking brutal. On top of that there's a lot of very disturbing, very disgusting violence basically constantly on the page. And that's really why I wanted to bring this up, is just be like, look, here's another example of how fucking brutal this whole thing, how this guy, like, I think we're doing work to we know Intragian and the thing inside him as crazy, unhinged, and sometimes violent, but like we're leaning into the otherworldliness here, right? Like his strength to do this, his size, his ferocity. We are really pushing hard to show that it's not just your run of the mill crazy guy.
Yeah. I think one thing I'll say about this bit here is that it recontextualizes what I said, I think, previous week about the chief of police getting special treatment. It doesn't really seem in particular like that was super special treatment. It seems like a lot of people are getting murdered and carved up in creative ways. And this is just what he's doing. He's just having fun, indulging in this violent ecstasy as he goes about his murder spree.
But it is interesting to think about, like, if there's no pattern to be found about this, because I mean, like even in the Quonset hut, like some people were just shot, some people were like gutted, like it seems indiscriminate.
Yeah, exactly. I will say, I am warped by having consumed all of this violent media when I was young, just like everyone of my generation. But I don't. I still can. I'm still capable of being upset or disturbed by violence, and this book, I think, just due to this sort of like consistent pressure of the horrible stuff happening, it is kind of getting to me. And it's not that I can even point to like, oh man, it was so fucked up when that one thing happened. Like maybe I think it's just the onslaught of it.
It's constant. I mean,
it's constant and ceaseless.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna move from here really quickly into Steve and Cynthia walking into a house and finding a dead baby in their high chair, and it's like there's no break. Like you move from poor little 6-year-old girl getting her neck broken to this to that to just bam, 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 bam. It just doesn't stop.
Right. Yeah. And that's a great point. Like different magnitudes where it's like you got a room full of people who are hung up like carcasses, and that hits you in a certain way, but it's not like relatable. And then you have a dead baby, and it's like, okay, well, that's it's only a dead family around the dinner table, but like that upsets you in like a different way. And there's
Mhm.
he's kind of intentionally, I feel like he's like a boxer who's like going for the head, but then he's going for the liver, and then he's going back for the head. He's keeping it moving where you're
Uh-huh.
not sure like what emotional frequency he's going to hit you on next, and that it is getting to me in that way.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I think you're right in the intentionality of that he is really trying to push your buttons a lot. And
Mhm.
this, I mean, I think this goes into, what when you're doing a book like we said, this is the idea of, let's talk about faith, let's talk about religion, let's talk about spirituality, let's talk about what it means to believe in these things in the world we live in. We're putting these characters, this character David especially, in a position where he is being uh, assaulted with some of the most violent, awful tendencies of man,
Yeah.
and that feels purposeful to me.
Yeah. Yep.
I really like this scene, Matt, where they divvy up the guns and like Johnny tries to maneuver it so that Mary is the one who gets the only gun they don't have bullets for. They need 22s and they don't have it, but she she kind of outmaneuvers him and is like, "Well, if someone's gonna be swinging this gun around, it should be the man, shouldn't it be?" And it's just the like we say that I haven't really glommed onto these characters as much this time, but there's parts of Mary that I'm just like, hell yeah, hell yeah, you
Yeah.
get him, you got him. You're so much
Yeah.
smarter than he is, actually.
Yeah, it's true, and that's one of the uh, things I mean about her being uh, having more spine,
Hmm.
which interestingly plays off of Johnny in a particular way, where we're seeing more and more of a kind of blatantly misogynist streak from him,
Oh
where
my god, yeah,
in the literal sense of just like he doesn't seem to like women a whole lot. He seems to find that they should be quiet and stay out of the way, and all
yeah.
these things.
He
Um,
says in this moment, quote, he didn't like women answering questions that had been aimed at him.
yeah,
Not
yeah.
people, not people, women.
Yeah. Yeah. So he comes off as a huge asshole here, and it's
Yeah,
particularly like relevant, I think, that it's this character, Mary, who's just very strong willed and forthright and clever.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of the perfect person to push up against his particular thing.
Yeah.
So as they debate what to do and where to go next, a storm rages outside. And into that storm, they see a truck drive by. We know that it's Steve and Cynthia in that truck. And our characters don't, at least not at first. And I think this is one of those things that like intentionally is constructed to drive you, the reader, just a little bit crazy when you're just like, they're just so close. And it's like, no, how did you? And then I think later when we see the scene from Cynthia's perspective, it's like, oh, was that a flashlight back there? And you just want to grab the book and be like, yes, yes, it was. Turn around.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally feel you. It's frustrating. I think on some level it would have felt too neat and tidy if they just drove into town at the exact moment that the crew was emerging from the jail. It would have just been
Hmm.
like, oh,
Hmm.
really? But them kind of seeing each other and then passing on, I feel like that's like, okay, God is guiding them in the right direction, but they're not perfect. So
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. So with that, we follow the truck and catch up with Cynthia and Steve a little bit here, who are definitely starting to realize that there are some problems in the town of Desperation. This is interesting though, Matt. I think the thing that really stuck out to me here is that this is actually the first time in the book that we are seeing things from Cynthia's point of view. And so we're getting to see in her head, we're getting to see how she feels about Steve, and maybe like our our examination of the quote unquote platonic nature of the relationship between the two of them was just like a misinterpretation, or maybe it was just us reading how Steve looked at the relationship. But I think we see very quickly from Cynthia's side of things that this is a bit more complicated, that she's a bit more aware of that this is a man and I am a woman,
mm,
and there are implications here. This quote in particular really stood out to me. She should have been pissed at him smiling at times like this, but she wasn't. It was hard to be pissed at a man who could light up that way, and she knew that was half her damned problem. So like she's using the ways in which she feels perhaps a growing attraction to Steve as kind of representative of her whole thing with men, which we know she has a history with not good history with men in her life. I don't know. What was your read on this?
Well, for one thing, it does seem as the book has gone on, it has become a bit more. There's been a bit more attraction on both sides,
Sure.
and it's hard to tease out what is the effect of this hypersexualizing demon statue versus just what they sort of organically are starting to feel for each other. But I think part of what we're picking up on here is that I think Steve has a lot on his mind, or even when he picked her up in the van in the first place, he had a lot on his mind because he's like, oh man, I'm having to juggle my like duties to my employer. I specifically promised not to pick up hitchhikers, and I got to follow this guy, and then I got this phone call from him, and like Steve's mind has been totally occupied with all these complicated balls he's juggling, whereas Cynthia's mind has been largely focused from the moment we met her on like, this guy, is this guy going to murder me? Is this guy a serial killer? Is trying to kind of figure him out. And she's doing it not because necessarily she's into him, but because it's a survival strategy. It's like, I gotta figure this guy out because men are dangerous and they could kill me, and they've tried to before, which has not only been borne out by her life experience, but is just true.
Yeah.
And she's a hitchhiker, so she's in a very dangerous position. So just overall, I feel like it's understandable that her sort of perception of him would be a lot more detailed than his perception of her, where she's just somebody he picked up in the car, and then all this shit went down, and he hasn't necessarily been paying as much attention. But I will say, as this chapter goes on, as this week's reading goes on, there's a lot more notes of like, she'll say something funny or silly, and the Steve's internal narration will comment like, oh, did she even realize how funny she was? And it's like, these are sort of the kinds of thoughts that a person has when they're just kind of really into somebody.
Yeah.
So
I like that. I like everything you said there, and I think I agree. That especially because it doesn't result in us having made a mistake, and those are the best things to agree with.
Definitely correct.
But no, I mean, just the ways in which, I mean, like in the hitchhiky paradigm, like the ways in which they look at those situations differently, especially in the man woman nature of that. Like he is generally at much less risk in that scenario, both by being the person who is picking up and by being a pretty big man, and her being a small woman who is the hitchhiker. So that informs how they relate to each other, and that informs how they look at each other, and they're also their pasts, her hangups with men. I think it's all great, and once again, the fun of this is getting to see how these characters look from the other person's perspective, and getting to see, like, you kind of wonder, you wonder how, like, the thing that got me thinking is like, what was Cynthia thinking when the entire time they were in the Quonset hut? Like, like we saw what she was saying, how scared she was, but what was she thinking in those moments?
That's a good point. There's so much like asymmetry that's fun to reflect on, like all these moments when he's sort of looking at her body and thinking like how she looks like she's 100 pounds soaking wet and all this, and it's like, well, if you symmetry reverse that, well, first of all, it's asymmetric, so it's like she's looking at him and thinking like, this is a giant dangerous man who I don't know. Not that he's necessarily giant, but if she's 100 pounds soaking wet, then by definition he's and if he keeps thinking this thought about her, it's like it's a thought about a relative comparison in some sense. So I like it would be a fun book for me to reread, I think, because then I would be thinking, I would have more of a clear sense of who Cynthia is, and I'd be able to, in the scenes where she is present but not having a point of view, I could think more about like, well, she obviously doesn't like this situation, but she's playing it off or whatever, which may not have been clear to me on the first read through.
Yeah, no, this is really fun to think about, because like, you go back to their like original meeting scene where, you know, he's looking at her and he's looking at her shirt,
Hmm.
and while also at the same time commenting on the fact that she has no boobs.
Hmm.
And her response to that is like a very kind of funny, I think, like I forget what she says specifically, but like, I hope you're a fan of whatever band
Hmm.
she had on her shirt. And like that in the moment comes off as like a very kind of cute, joking thing.
Hmm.
But like, we know her experiences with men, and like, there's probably some actual genuine discomfort and fear behind that. And the character that Cynthia is she plays that off as kind of this like, haha, like, you know, I'm just gonna shrug it off and turn it back on you, like the whole "don't call me Cookie" thing, right?
Hmm.
Like that comes off as like, from the Steve perspective, as like a very cute interaction between the two of them that he actually does a callback to later in the book. Um, but like, you do wonder like how much of that is her giving off this sense of confidence and an ability to deal with the nonsense of men, while also underneath it being very, very, very afraid and attached to the trauma that she's experienced with men in the past.
It's so fascinating because I literally didn't even parse that interaction that you referred to as being like her catching him staring at her chest and
Hmm.
being like, as sort of calling him out for it, and also like as a way of testing, like, how's he going to respond
Yeah.
if I mention this? Is he going to get mad? Because if he's going to get
Hmm.
mad, then maybe I don't want to be in his car.
Yeah.
And it's like, what's funny to me is it seems like Steve also doesn't get it.
No, no.
Which is maybe why you don't get it, or why I didn't get it in the moment. Um, um, but
I think he gets it in the level of like, he knows that she just caught him looking at her chest,
uh-huh,
but I don't think he parses it by anything more than just the surface level of like, she's kind of pushing back against me
uh-huh,
in this fun little cool girl kind of way,
uh-huh.
and not anything underneath it at all. I mean, this is really interesting because it ties back to what we were talking about in the very first episode of the 90s being this decade in which King seems really interested in exploring women and the difficulties and trials and tribulations of being a woman.
Hmm.
And so like, you almost look at what's happening with these two characters, and you can almost say that the Steve point of view is perhaps the way Steve King would have written this earlier in his career. And then we can get to and cut to the Cynthia point of view and being like, okay, but let's explore what this was like for her,
Mm,
actually. um
yeah, I like that a
I
lot.
don't know, I might be reading too much into that, but it just, this whole conversation got me thinking about that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Just uh, almost characters from two different epochs of his
Yeah.
writing career. That's a
Yeah.
fun thought.
Yeah, and it's perfect because Cynthia is a character that, you know, literally comes from this current phase in his career. Steve, not literally a character from a previous phase in his career, but I will say that Steve Ames feels at home in some classic King. He feels like a very classic King character.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
sure. Yeah.
yeah. All right. So before he's comfortable heading out of town, Steve insists that they have to make sure that things aren't weird, that things are bad here. So he insists on going into one of the houses and looking inside. I think Cynthia calls this horror movie shit,
Uh-huh.
which is great. So they head inside the house. They find, as we mentioned already, a dead family at a dinner table. But not just this dead family at the dinner table, Matt. They also find a whole bunch of rattlesnakes
Uh-huh.
crawling all over, in and out of the bodies. So not only, Matt, do you have a dead infant, but which once again, the detail here of the baby wore a bib which read, "I'm a big boy now." He was slumped sideways behind his tray, on which there were several stiff-looking orange slices. He regarded Cynthia with a frozen grin. His face was purple. His eyes bulged from puffy sockets like glass marbles. That's a lot of detail.
Uh-huh.
That's rough. And there are
Yeah.
snakes crawling around him.
Yeah, it's a upsetting picture. That the I'm a big boy now for some reason. Well, not for some reason. I think I know the reason. It's like, oh yeah, that's exactly the kind of stuff that you'd put your kid in.
Yep, I would
Um,
do that.
and
My
and
son has several Big Brother shirts
and
right now.
it's cute, and the juxtaposition of cute and hopeful of the future with dead baby is extremely upsetting, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. But the snakes, Matt, the second they see Cynthia and Steve, make a beeline for them. They start heading to attack them right away, which is not the way snakes behave, by the way.
Mhm. Yeah.
So they get the hell out of there. They decide they've seen enough to make their way out of town, and they do so only to discover that some motorhomes have been moved, and now the entrance to Desperation is blocked. And what's worse, there's an army waiting for them, Matt. An army of scorpions and snakes. Oh, and dive bombing buzzards that are kamikazing into the glass of the truck. This is an escalation, Matt.
Yeah.
This is shit's going down now.
Yeah. It's interesting because I couldn't figure out if it's an escalation because they interacted with the statue, or if it's an escalation because they're heading away from the town and the animals are kind of trying to herd them back toward the town.
Yeah.
Or maybe something else I haven't thought of. But
And if it is the latter, the answer is, I mean, there's a few questions here, like why?
Yeah.
First of all, and then also, like, when did Intragian move the motorhome? Like, when did that happen?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. It wasn't even clear like how it had got there. I think him moving it probably makes the most sense, but it's also possible somebody else moved it. I guess I would, simplifying things, I would lean toward him moving it, but it is strange. I like the moment where they almost run into it and Steve like screams.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting to see that from Cynthia's perspective, actually, because it makes kind of everything in this chapter makes Steve seem like he's kind of fraying a bit more than maybe he seemed from his own perspective.
Yeah, I agree.
And interestingly enough, it almost feels like she's the one who's holding herself together better than Steve is, because he's almost like in denial about how bad the situation is.
Yeah.
And sort of, again, like he like screams when he sees the motorhome or whatever it is, the trailer, and in a way that is described as being unlike his normal voice. And it's like, yeah, he's definitely extremely on edge here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, because like even when the buzzard like smashes into the window, he's kind of like still like, maybe we'll try to get around them.
Yeah.
and Cynthia's like, dude, we're being dive bombed by birds.
Yeah.
Like, don't you yeah, he's just, she seems to be catching up to the nature of the situation a lot faster than he is.
Right.
And I think maybe part of that is him trying to put on this male bravado for her, especially which is being reinforced by like the detail of her like hating snakes, really hating snakes, and then they get to spiders really later, and she's like, oh, spiders, that's even worse than snakes. And it's just like the very stereotypical like girly reaction to these things, and Steve's response to that is like having to be the guy, but he is fucking terrified too.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. I guess it's not funny in the moment, obviously, but like he can't stand rats, but he's really just as freaked out by the animals as her, is the point.
Yeah.
There's no, I agree. Yeah.
All right, we move into chapter 4. This chapter begins with Johnny rushing back into the cell to grab his phone, convinced that the car he has kind of worked through and reasoned through it, Matt, and decided that the car they saw drive by, the van they saw drive by, must have been Steve. And so he's heading back to get his phone, and we get this part as he's looking at the other men around him. Ralph now held on to the rifles. He had it in the crook of his arm, like he thought he was Daniel Boone. Oh, Johnny, a mocking voice spoke up from inside his head. It was Terry, the never-say-die bitch who had gotten him into this fuckaroo in the first place. Don't tell me you're jealous of Mr. Suburban Ohio, are you? So I just had to point this out because, like Mary before him, Johnny is blaming the situation that he's in on someone else. Johnny is blaming Terry, which I want to point out the special irony of this. A few chapters ago, Johnny said that this idea was all his and was so minorly her idea that he didn't even need to give her credit in the book that he was going to write. Like, he didn't even need to give her a credit for the idea. And now suddenly This is all your fault, Terry.
Yeah. Love it. It's all her idea. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Yeah. It goes along with this idea of blame we've been talking about for sure.
Yep. So we didn't talk about it much in the jailhouse. It was kind of slowly set up here, but it kind of comes to a head, or begins to come to a head here, so we can talk about it here. This level of animosity between Tom Billingsley, the town veterinarian, and Johnny Marinville, that seems like they are characters that are kind of constantly sizing each other up, giving each other looks, and it comes up here. And I think we see very quickly that perhaps the primary reason for this conflict escalating the way it is that Johnny is recognizing one of his own. He's recognizing an addict. We learned very quickly that Tom Billingsley seems to be a mildly functioning alcoholic, and of course we know that Johnny's in recovery. So, what did you think about this conflict and the way it is beginning to rear its head, and where it perhaps could go, Matt?
Yeah, I guess I was to sort of circle around the question. I was thinking about how King writes Marinville from the inside, from inside his head versus from outside his head.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like King has a lot of sympathy for people like Johnny, while also being kind of disgusted by them. And I think it's probably because there's parts of himself that he sees in this character or people like this, and then there's parts of himself that he doesn't like, and parts of himself that he does like, and that's a struggle for him. That's an interesting thing to play out in your fiction, I think. I don't want to project too much, but that's kind of what it feels like to me. And so within that framing, from inside Johnny's head, his actions toward Tom seem sort of, if not reasonable, then like more like he's kind of joking around, maybe just joking a little harder than is necessary.
Yeah.
From inside Johnny's head, it doesn't feel like he's mad dogging Tom, but from outside Johnny's head, it seems more like what Mary later says, which is that he is establishing a pecking order. He needs to throw his weight around. He needs to exert dominance. He needs to exert his personality, and that's, and I just think it's really cool how he's the same dude. It's just like he kind of seems totally different whether we're in his head or not in his head. He seems a lot worse when we're not in his head, because we don't have that little voice sort of contextualizing and gently self-justifying constantly.
Yeah, I agree. With the exception of the voice of Terry popping in every once in a while to push back against him. So I think to kind of go along with this is they're heading towards where Tom suggests they go, which is the American West, which is an old abandoned theater that he and his drinking buddies would hang out in. It's also a metaphor.
Yeah.
Perhaps we'll get into the American West of it all at a later date, but like that's a very specific and targeted name. It feels like, to name a place the American West. I don't know if you've read or looked ahead and saw, Matt, but part 3 of the novel is titled The American West.
I did not see that.
Legendary Shadows. The American West : Legendary Shadows.
Yeah, they could have just called it The Evening Redness in the West, and that would have worked too.
But anyway, so as they're heading there, Johnny sees a store. He breaks in. He gets some Advil for himself because his nose is really hurting, having been broken by Intragian. And then while he's there, he picks up some booze for his new friend Tommy, just to give him a little bit of his pick me up.
What a nice guy.
Yeah, right.
That's what you always want to do for your alcoholic friends, is you want to pick them up a big handle of Jim Beam or whatever it is.
No, don't worry though. He's going to regulate it though. He's only going to give him a sip every so often. It's like controlled dosing.
Yeah. No, I do think this is interesting because it's sort of a like backhanded charitable act where it's like on the, like from within Johnny's head, you can sort of see it as like, yeah, I mean, he's an alcoholic. He'll start getting the shakes if he doesn't get his sippy. But it's like also you can read it as a kind of condescending, like, I know you need this. I don't need this anymore, but I know you need this kind of further act of personality. throwing
Yeah,
weight
I mean,
around.
and that to me is where I think all this animosity comes from, is this place of insecurity
Mhm,
where,
mhm.
you know, the thing that Tom is suffering with is very close to home to him. He has, at least at this moment, managed to overcome that addiction. But he always will feel its pull. And I think, isn't there a moment where he like has to talk himself out of taking a little nip of the booze as well? Like
I
he wants it briefly. Um,
I don't recall. I don't recall.
I think so, and I think this is him, wanting to reestablish exactly what you said, that I don't need this right now, and so I'm going to be the one that doles it out for you, the weak, terrible version of myself that I am better than now. And
Right.
and this being the one in charge of this reinforces this whole thing for me.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. One creepy thing I did want to just point out, Matt, is that there's just like a group of coyotes hanging out and watching them the entire time. They're kind of figuring out where to go and breaking into the store and stuff. They don't seem to be doing anything. And we kind of guessed or reasoned that perhaps Intragian could like see through their eyes and use them to spy. But like, we don't see anything definitive about that, right? Like, because when not Intragian shows up at the very end of these chapters, he seems totally unaware that they've broken out of prison until he gets to the prison. So like, I don't know. They're spies, I guess, but like they have to report back.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unclear, right? I think I was reading way too much into it when he said that he stole the holes in their eyes or whatever it
Yeah,
was.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
was like, oh, so he like has possession of their eyes. And it would kind of, there were things earlier in the book that kind of made sense where rather like he knew things that it would be impossible for him to know without some supernatural means.
Sure.
And so I was guessing that the animals were involved, but it's like, I don't know. He's probably just reading their minds. We kind of already know. I think we already resolved this actually.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I guess it was the thing to pay attention to here, I guess, is that the animals, even when he's nowhere near, are continuing to act weird. And I mean, we just saw this with the turkeys, the vultures dive bombing the car, and here we have the coyotes. So the animals are all active, like acting like a sort of hive mind almost,
Hmm.
um, self-organizing to keep an eye on the humans or corral them or what have you.
Yeah, but it's good that we see kind of that they do have a limitation. Like, it's not like everything that like, imagine this world in which every single scorpion or spider in the town of Desperation that saw Johnny Marinville would able to be instantaneously report that information back to the bad guy. That
Yeah,
would
yeah,
be not good.
yeah, yeah.
All right. So from here, we cut back to Steve and Cynthia as they are still in their bad situation. They're driving backwards. They're backing away from this nightmare army of bugs and snakes and dive bombing buzzards. They see very quickly that having stopped and kind of moved away from the entrance or exit to the town, rather, the animals just kind of back off and leave them alone, which I think supports your hypothesis, Matt, that they're really only active if you're trying to leave, which begs the question: why are you keeping them here? Like, what is the goal here in Desperation? What's going on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure. I and you know how smart are the animals? I guess is one thing you could say. Like,
Mm-hmm.
are they really, are they being guided by some more intelligent hand, or is this a sort of yeah, I guess I don't even have my thoughts in order enough to clearly articulate a question. It's just like, what have the animals been told to do exactly,
Mm-hmm.
and what do they think they're doing? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's the great questions. Great questions. We don't know, but
Yeah.
we don't know. But we do know that as they're sitting there in their car trying to figure out what the hell to do next, for some reason their minds go back to that creepy wolf statue, Matt, and they start talking about what it made them think about: sex. And I don't think we've used your term here yet before, Matt, but we're gonna do it right now.
Yay.
Pink, right?
Yep. It's the to remind any listeners who haven't thought about this in a while. This was introduced, I guess, in the Dark Tower, right? The idea
Mm-hmm. Yep.
of there being sort of, and I think some of this was our own theory crafting, but basically King uses the colors pink and red as sort of symbols for pink being like lust and animalistic sexual drive versus
Yeah.
red being like romantic love. You know, I think there can still be some passion to the red side of things, but it's more about the mind, and sex is more
Yeah.
about the body. I mean, you could even say, Scott, the pink is more about the sarks, and red is more about the pneuma. I'm so
I
happy. I'm so happy.
I
So
think you
happy
could.
now.
I think you could. Yeah, and the origin of this is of course the Merlin's rainbow stone that we get in Wizard and Glass that is so directly connected to sex, especially for Rhea of the Coos, who fell in love with that little ball.
Yeah,
Did terrible things to it.
she did. But yeah, that's definitely the whole idea of this statue and the things that it does to them. It seems a lot like the some of the Dark Tower magic stuff that was pushing the sex buttons in people's heads.
Well, and I think this is the part that I really wanted to talk to you about, is because it also seems like, these are, lust, sex, violence. These are temptations, right? We have this biblical world we're creating here in Desperation, Nevada, and we have our characters being brought in here, and then they're tempted by these things, and it just fits, it slots very nicely into everything you've talked about before, but into this examination of, let's call it, sin and faith and how characters react to these things.
Yeah.
The point that I think supports this idea that there is something magic in the air is the fact that it's not as if the statue has shown up again yet. It's just they're thinking about it, and even thinking about the statue seems to activate it, because our characters are suddenly just grabbing each other
very suddenly.
Yeah, just like so, and this is like, it's so surreal how quickly it happens. Where I think it's just like Cynthia says, "You think that's nasty? Check this out," and then she's grabbing herself, and you're just like, "Wait, what?
Yeah.
Whoa, hold on! Did I miss something?" You would not be blamed if you like flip back pages and be like, "Did something? What's happening here?"
Yeah.
And I think that's the point, right? Is it happens so quickly. It's so out of left field. And even Steve, his reaction to that is like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Is this happening? Are we doing this? All right, let's do it.
Yeah. But he's out of control of his body at the same time too. Like, and that's some of the most fun stuff in here, is his explicit struggle with his body. It's almost like, Sarks and Numa fighting each other for control. So I it wasn't entirely, I think I wasn't as shocked as I might have been, because I was, the stuff earlier with Johnny and the statue and so forth. I was kind of aware that there's some kind of ambient sexual perversion field around the whole place that seems to operate perhaps in proximity to the statue, perhaps, and the statue, as we're about to find out, is actually being brought toward them, although we don't know that right now. Which kind of explains this retroactively.
Yeah, sure. I agree. It was adequately set up and established in the story up until this point, but I still think the moment I will, every time I read this book, the moment where she just says, "You want to see something nasty?" and just like grabs his hand and puts it on her.
Yeah,
you're just like, oh,
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's just like sudden personality change for her, which is totally inconsistent with how she was behaving just 2 seconds ago.
Yeah. And she's got this wide smile on her face.
Yeah.
It's the whole thing is incredibly disturbing and surreal.
Yeah.
I also really like this quote as it's happening. "Are you a nice person?" she'd asked him, and he had said, "Yeah, I guess so." And then, nice person that he was, he had brought her to this town of the dead, and his hand was in her crotch, and he was thinking he'd like to fuck her and hurt her at the same time. Kind of an experiment, you could say, one having to do with pleasure and pain, the sweet and the salty, because that's the way it was done in the place of the wolf. That's how it was done in the house of the scorpion. It was what passed for love in desperation. Um, love
Yeah.
it so much. Like,
Yeah.
just even that's what passed for love. Like, this is a distortion and a inversion of what love is. I think a little bit later they say it was like sex and murder had somehow changed places in this horrible little town.
Mhm. You know, one advantage of you reading these passages out loud is sometimes I get like a deeper metaphorical read, but sometimes I just get a more literal read, which can be
Hmm.
useful. And that's what kind of happened to me just now, is I realized, like, well, yeah, in the place of the wolf, in the place of the scorpion, these are animals.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
They do not experience love in the way that humans do. Wolves get a partial pass because they're very social animals, but I do think it's the case that they probably don't experience love the way humans experience love.
Hmm.
And for them, survival and sex and violence are all just this big gumbo of stuff that's going on,
Yeah.
for animals. And so for what we're literally saying on the literal level of these sentences is like they were being pulled into their animal side.
Yeah.
They're behaving and thinking more like animals.
Hmm. But Matt, our good boy, our nice person Steve, manages to pull back. He realizes the insanity of what he was doing, and he pulls back. He stops it, and that's a powerful character moment, isn't it? That,
Yeah.
like, this overwhelming sense, this overwhelming urge. Like, you can just say put Johnny Marinville in this same situation, and he's going for it, right?
Yeah. I think so. I mean, it's it's actually very interesting. It says a lot about his character that he is the one to pull back, because, like, I would say recent scenes have made him seem maybe slightly weaker, like the situation is
Hmm.
getting to him. And the fact that he's actually the one, like, I think I was sort of prepared for Cynthia to be the one who keeps her head on straight and maybe has to, like, fight him off or something.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but
That
that's
seems like that would be, in line with, expectations. I think,
yeah.
especially with her past with men, like, that would be specifically activating her trauma.
Yeah.
In a she's experienced kind of the animalistic nature of men in the past, and then suddenly she's brought to it via this magic idol thing.
And so it makes him
Yeah.
seem a little bit stronger, yeah. But of course, this also emphasizes how powerful the magic is that they're dealing with, because even this resistance only lasts for a second.
Yeah, well, because, yeah, the thing that happens after this is a giant timber wolf looking beast shows up,
Uh-huh.
with crimson eyes. By the way, I don't know if you do this thing where every time you hear or see the word crimson in any King book from now on, you're just gonna be like, said
Oh,
the word.
I wasn't thinking about that, but yes, you're totally right.
It's got some crimson eyes, and it brings our new favorite sex toy to play.
Hmm.
This has an immediate effect on both of them and basically completely destroys any resistance to the thing they had in the moment. Like, look at this writing. I love this writing here. She grinned back, her thin cheeks stretched upwards until it was like looking at a skull grin. Greenish white light from the dashboard painted her brow and lips, filled in her eye sockets. She stuck her tongue out through that grin and flicked it at him like a snake tongue of the statue. He stuck his own tongue out and wriggled it back at her. Then he groped for the door handle. He would race her to the fragment, and they would make love amongst the scorpions, with it held in their mouths between us. And whatever happened after that wouldn't matter. Ugh. Ugh.
Yeah.
It's good shit.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's clear that the power of the statue is so overwhelming that even though they both almost broke out on their own will, they can't beat it. But then, of
Mhm.
course, they are saved by God.
Mhm. I like the way King uses verbs sometimes.
Hmm.
Like, just he groped for the door handle is just the perfect word in this instance, right? Like, you almost read that, and you as you're reading the sentence, you hear then he groped, and are like, oh, he's going for her.
Yeah.
Um
No, but
and
he. Yeah. Yeah.
ugh, ugh, I love
Yeah.
it.
I like that a lot. I also, just to you know actually talk about the thing you read, the idea that it could be corny that they're sitting there wiggling their tongues at each other, but the situation is so upsetting and unpleasant and serious that it did not strike me as corny. It struck me
No.
as like weird and upsetting in a cool way.
But this is one of those things that you wonder, would that corniness just take over in if you transfer this to a visual medium? And I don't know. I think we'll find out in a few weeks.
Yeah, probably. I mean,
I've never seen the movie. I don't even know if any of this stuff is in it. I'm just supposing.
yeah.
All right, so we leave this incredibly tense scene to head back with the rest of the gang. Johnny returns with his nip for Tom, and their animosity continues to escalate, confounding Mary. But then something happens, Matt. David asks to see Johnny's phone, which he previously could not get a signal out. But at the second David touches the phone, it magically gets not 1 bar, not 2 bars, but 3 bars. Matt, 3 bars.
Praise God.
The holy trinity of cell phone bars.
Oh my God. You're totally right. Totally what it is.
And like, I think King like does effort to confirm this as well by like Johnny snatches the phone back from David. It immediately loses signal again. David then takes it back a second time, and immediately once again the bars are back. And this is like, we've had conversations throughout the weeks of all this stuff could just be coincidence.
Mhm.
And like, this is just David operating with the supreme confidence he has of feeling like he has God on his side, but it's just things happening. But this is one that is just like, oh, this just seems like magic now. Like this is like he magically makes the cell phone work. We even actually get some support of this from Audrey a little bit later in the chapter when she says that the metals and the rocks around here just make cell phone signals like terrible in this area in general. So this is like inarguably just David is magic. It's hard to get around this one.
Yeah, and the other characters are just rolling with it at this point.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Of course, David is able to reach Steve because he has the power of God. And finally, almost 350 pages into the story, our two groups might be merging together. Is this? So this is a question I've seen. I saw this complaint from a couple people this week. There's actually a thread on our subreddit talking about like, why do you think people didn't like this book as much? And some people were sharing, the things about this book they didn't like as much. And some people said kind of the very kind of slow nature of it is wrong, but just like that, it's not that it's slow. It just like it feels like it takes a while to get to its point. Like we are halfway through this book right now, Matt. We're halfway through. Does it feel like anything has really started to happen yet? Maybe just a little bit, but like it still feels like we're in the stage setting portion of the book.
Yeah, well, I think the question is still like, what is the book? Is it just them?
Yeah.
Is it them meeting up and trying to escape, or presumably there's going to be some confrontation with Intrajan, and they're going to have to defeat him, and then like what shape does this take? Are there more twists and turns between here and there? Are there more character conflicts that escalate? I don't know, and the shape of what it's going to be is not clear. But none of that bothers me though. None of that is making me feel impatient. I'm just sort of following the characters as they go through these situations and wondering what they're going to do next, basically.
Sure. That's cool. I mean, I'm very glad. Yeah, and not a complaint of mine either. I was it just really like the thing that happens is when you look back and remember these books and think about these books after you've read them and several years go by, like the setup stuff tends to like glom together in the way that you just kind of assume, oh, this is like just the first half or the first quarter of the book, and then this as I'm going through it, sometimes I'm like, man, we don't get to the theater until 400 pages into the book. So we get to the theater. I don't remember it taking that long.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I feel you, but it's just like I've been so invested in the moment to moment like procedural survival mechanics of like this is probably a book that's very difficult to reread and have anything like the same experience, because for me, just the simple act of exploring the Quonset hut was extremely intense, and you
Mhm.
have no idea what they're going to find. You have no idea how they're going to react to it. It's all new and interesting and fresh, and I was riveted. And I just already know that rereading the book is not going to have the same effect, because you're like, yeah, and then they go to the Quonset hut, and the Quonset hut's full of dead bodies. I know that. So like it can't is it's one of those books that can't really work the same way. And so I am able to understand what you're saying, but I'm like, that's just not my experience on this first read through.
Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Sure. So yeah, as you already said, this call comes in at the perfect time, almost as if it was ordained by God themselves, to interrupt Steve and Cynthia from their uh, wolf idol powered lust. They're kind of broken from their trance, and are able to drive the wolves away by giving the car some good old fashioned honks. I don't know why. Like it was just kind of delightful to me that this phone call between David and Steve is going on, and then Steve's like honking the the horn, and David's like, "What's that? What are you doing?
Yeah.
What's going on?"
Yeah, that is funny. That reminds me a comment I was going to make. This is as good a place as any. Is that like David seems to be like escalating in supernaturalness gradually,
Mm-hmm.
and it's funny because now we're not in his head, and there are things that he says and does throughout this situation, particularly when he's on the phone,
Mm-hmm.
where you're like, is God telling him to say this? Is God suggesting that they meet at the theater, like, or is this just David's idea?
Yeah.
Unclear, continually unclear. And I kind of like that, because now we're like, well, we know God talks to him sometimes, but we don't know what exactly has been instruction from God versus just David kind of feeling it out versus just his own idea, or what have you. And I think that's really fun.
No, that's a good point. I think it is very interesting that we basically, since the kind of introduction to him and his interaction that led him to God, we've really kind of stayed out of his head. And it creates these moments like this that I've pulled out here, that he's talking on the phone to Steve, and then he uh, intentionally like turns around, and Johnny realizes that he doesn't want the coyotes across the street to hear what he's saying. I know how crazy that sounds, but it's what he's doing. Like, how did he know to do that? Like,
Yeah.
like if we were in his head, you're right, we might hear the voice of God come to him, or we might hear his logical thought process of how he gets there. But to the outside observer, it just seems like, oh wow, like he just seems to know everything. He just like, he's like, knows when to take the phone. He knows what to say to Steve. Like, all he just knows, and it makes him. It takes what is already, ramping up in power and magic, and exaggerates it almost.
Yeah, exactly.
So David directs the pair to the movie theater, and then he hangs up, and he gets this question: "How'd you do it, David? Magic?" The kid looked at him as if Marinville was crazy. "God," he said. "God, you dope," Mary said, smiling in a way that did not feel familiar to her at all. This wasn't the time to be pulling Marinville's chain, but she simply could not resist it.
Love it.
I think this is interesting, though, and I want to talk to you about this idea in general. Like, David, and perhaps it's just because we're not in his head right now, but I also think this lines up with the moments we have been in his head. He doesn't seem to have any doubt about any of this. And we talked a few weeks ago about, like, the thing that I love about good, well-told stories that examine God and faith and spirituality and these things. The thing that I love most about them is the ways in which a character of faith is challenged on that faith. Like, two Scorsese films jump to mind as The Last Temptation of Christ, and then also Silence. Just incredible movies examining faith and having characters of faith, have that tested and explored and tempted to betray that. David is not that, right?
Yeah.
Like I think David has some qualms with his cruel God, right? Like, he's just like, hey, that's fucked up. But he basically, as we said, is just listening to him. He doesn't have any struggle. He doesn't think, oh, is that the right thing to do? He doesn't have any doubt. He just does it. He
Mhm.
just executes on whatever God tells him to do. Um, and like again, the book as a whole, the book largely thematically is struggling and wrestling with these questions of faith and spirituality and what does this mean. But one of its central protagonists does not. David just doesn't. At least not yet. There's still room possibly for that to happen, but right now, not at all. And that's a really interesting choice to me because like I would have guessed if you had told me that I would be like, no, I don't like that. This is what I hate about some of these faith-based stories is that just like no one is perfectly has perfect innocency, right? Of
Mhm.
just perfect like no, that's not realistic. Nobody does. Um,
Well,
but
I
I
yeah.
like it here. I do.
I like it here, I think, because it really explores what that would look like to really be
Mm-hmm.
taken seriously, like to really fully to the hilt understand and embody that level of innocency that's required, where no matter how bad it gets, no matter how cruel God becomes, the character will maintain their faith. And it's like, well, what kind of person does that take? What does that look like actually?
Mm-hmm.
Who could do that, and what do they have to have sort of accepted in their heart? um and is that even like good or desirable on some level? Like, think about
Yeah.
how like sort of ultimately like limitlessly self-abnegating you have to be to just accept, like, yeah, whatever literally whatever God requires of me. He can go full on Job and take my family and give me a plague of boils and whatever, and I'll still love him. Like, that's a unique kind of character. I mean, I think Job is actually the relevant reference here, and we know that King is interested in this notion of like the God who would do that to his beloved Job.
Mm-hmm.
And, um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's along these lines. Like, David is a character who understands that God is cruel before the start of the story. Really, I mean,
Yeah.
that we get that flashback before the start of the story. Most of the time, the characters we watch struggle with their faith. We watch them painfully learn this lesson that God is cruel, and we see their struggles. And this is a character who's like, "Yep, message received. God is cruel. This is not guaranteed to be fun. We are not guaranteed to win, at least in this world. Although we are going to be with God in heaven." He does essentially say that when he's burying Pi.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so his faith in God doesn't need to be tied to good outcomes. There can be a bad outcome here, and he can be like, well, shoot. um, uh, th- uh, you know, so I just think it's very interesting and relatively unusual to explore this kind of
Yeah.
character this way.
No, well said. I think that's why I just really like him and
Mhm.
like this in spite of everything I said a couple weeks ago. So yeah.
Yeah.
So as they prepare to make their way to the theater, Johnny tries to scare away the coyotes by talking to them in what David describes as the language of the dead. But it doesn't work, and instead David walks up and prays them away.
Yeah.
Which is this remarkably effective moment. I think the book says that like Johnny strolls into the street as if he's Moses,
Uh-huh.
um, and or a prophet, and then is completely ineffectual at doing anything there. And then David just walks up, just being himself, and like we're drawing comparisons between these characters, right? This is like we said this from the beginning that um, there is lines to be drawn by the differences in these two characters, and you just wonder where it's going. Like, is this a
Yeah.
story about Johnny finding his faith? It doesn't seem like it, but it's a story about something
Yeah.
about Johnny with faith.
Certainly doesn't seem to be heading that way.
Mm-hmm.
I did love the contrast of like um specifically with David, like having this sort of childish way of putting his hands together when he prays,
Mm-hmm.
and the way King read the narration here, or rather the way he read David's voice. He doesn't particularly have a David voice, but he did just say it in this very um childish way where he's like, and may God bless you and keep you, and that's it. And it's not even like it's not like he's intoning this prayer like a magic spell upon the coyotes. He just gives this very simple prayer
Sure.
in a childish way, and the coyotes just scatter, and that makes it even more effective.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. That's a good point. All right, so chapter 5, our final chapter of the week, begins with Steve and Cynthia again. They are making their way to the theater at David's instruction, and at his instruction, they stop to park their car in a garage nearby. They were specifically told by David not to park out front, which is another example, Matt, of your is he getting this from God, or is that just him being smart?
Right.
Who knows?
Yeah. Yep.
Steve goes into the garage, and while looking around, he finds another corpse and some spiders, some brown recluses just chilling there. Also, a rat. Can't be a king book without a horrible rat.
Yep. And Steve here also dislikes the rats.
Mm-hmm.
Can I say
Steve King?
It's weird. I could never put a character named Matt in one of my books. It would be too weird, right? Like to have a character named Steve. I'm just like, look, I know, I get that it's a common name. It would be a very strange thing, I feel, to do. But I haven't even thought twice about the fact that this character is named Steve, though. I haven't thought like, oh, does that mean that it's Stephen King? And it's like, no, it's just a character named Steve.
Guy named Steve, yeah.
But also, okay, so another thing is like now that we're finding, brown recluses and rats, it's like, yeah, your question about creepy desert animals from last week makes even more sense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question I have for you is, what do you think we're doing with this specifically? Like, we have this story about about faith, about believing, about God, and this so-called angel of death, and this army of a specific type of animal, a desert animal, vermin, not nice, happy animals, but all the bad ones, all the bad, ugly ones we don't like.
Well, I mean, that's really interesting because they kind of reminds me of like the pestilential sort of plagues of Egypt, and reminds me of wandering in the desert for 40 days or 40 years or whatever. Both at different times. And the idea that this is taking place in this setting is actually sort of vaguely biblical. Obviously, the American West does not have the same flora and fauna as I don't remember the names of these biblical places anymore, but I think maybe I mean, I was gonna say like the thing about Egypt is I don't know that Egypt was like desert 2,000 years ago, so I don't know.
I mean, there was the part of it that was by the Nile, so that was not.
That was. I really have no idea. I know that the whole Middle East and North Africa used to be a lot greener. Anyway, this is a tangent. The point is, I think there's some, at least image, conjuring of biblical imagery here.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there. I mean, I think that's why we've set this here, right? Like this, why didn't this story take place in Maine? Well, because we're using the imagery of the American Midwest, of the desert, of Nevada, to channel something. Jesus going into the desert for 40 days and nights. We talked about that already, and here we have once again the characters in the middle of the desert being tempted by things, being challenged by things. Yeah, it's all purposeful. And so I think these are the animals that we associate with like evil, like, right? Like these are the evil ones.
Yeah,
we don't know. Spiders aren't good. Oh, there's no good story about a spider. Ignore Charlotte's Web. Doesn't matter. Get rid of it.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's any good desert animals. it's not like I guess a hare, a desert hare.
I don't know.
But they're kind of a hard bitten looking kind of rabbit creature, You don't want to pet them.
I googled good desert animal. Didn't really come up with anything.
One of those little jumping rats, little jumping mice. Those are cute.
Yeah, got roadrunners. They're all right.
They're cool. Yeah.
The hell is an elf owl?
I don't know.
I can't get distracted by this.
It's a vicious predator, is what it is. Probably,
yeah. So Steve escapes the rat and the spiders, losing his shirt and his shit in the process. I do like this is an incredibly dark and disturbing book, but it's also really funny sometimes. Like when Cynthia just shows up and she's like, "Why do you take your shirt off?"
Yeah.
I just watched Home Alone recently because it's Christmas time, and there's that scene when Marv sees Harry and is like, "Why'd you take your shoes off?" And I couldn't stop hearing that scene when she sees him without a shirt. It's just like, what? Why is your shirt off?
Uh-huh.
I don't have time. Long story. Bad.
That's great. That's great. I see. I thought you were going to go the Galaxy Quest direction. Be like,
oh no, that's perfect. That's good too.
You managed to take your shirt off again. I mean, it's funny to me. Like, so we've got all these sexual undertones here, and then it's like he goes into the building for 10 seconds and then comes out and his shirt is off. And like, once again, this is one of those scenes where for him, he's just a fairly like focused person. And so he's like, the mission right now is we're getting the van into the garage. And in the course of the mission, the shirt came off. It's not important. And for her, it's like, oh shit, the large man who may be a threat has now taken his shirt off.
Yeah.
And there's all this weird sexual energy between us. What does this mean?
Yeah.
And
I am very conscious of the fact that he had his hand in my crotch literally 5 minutes ago.
Right. Where are we going with that? And then it's like, yeah, there was a rat. And he doesn't even explain. He's just like, yeah, there was a rat. There's a rat. And now your shirt is off. What are you talking about?
That's how you deal with rats.
Yeah.
You just strip and they're like, oh, I got to get out of here.
It was very relatable though, when he puts on this coverall and he spends like 45 minutes patting it down because he's,
oh my God.
I don't even know if that would be adequate for me. I feel like I would like roll it up like into a tube, and then I would like smack it against the concrete for a while, and then I would put it on.
Yeah, well, then we get this part here where he's got it on, and it says something tickled across the back of his neck, and he slapped at it madly, thinking of the brown recluses lined up so neatly along the edge of his desk.
Yeah,
that's the thing. I don't know if we talked about this before, but like, if I see ants in my house, every like itch and tickle. And maybe just like air moving past my arm hair is an ant crawling on me.
Totally.
Like for the rest of the night. And like, it sucks.
That was one thing along those lines I thought was really interesting. Very unusual for King to describe things the way he described the brown recluses, because he's like, I don't remember the word he uses. It was like a creature crawls out onto the magazine, and then another creature, and then another creature, and then it's only after they've already sort of like lined up that he tells you these are brown recluse spiders. And so you're like, my brain didn't know. I'm a very visual like reader, so I was like, what what is it?
Oh, interesting.
You know, so I thought that was a very unusual, because like normally he's intentionally not doing that to you. Like he's paying a ton of attention as a writer to like, how do I paint the picture without drawing attention to the fact that I'm doing anything at all? Just, being invisible as a writer, basically. But here he did this on purpose, and I wasn't really sure why, actually. Like it highlights the unusual behavior of the spiders, the fact that they're lining up like soldiers, and also spiders don't usually socialize at all, so it makes it even more unusual.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the reason, right? That like we see this behavior before we even know they're spiders, and then we go, oh, 3 spiders lining up like soldiers on parade. Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
And it makes them so inherently more dangerous, right? Because like brown recluses are dangerous animals, but probably the odds of you getting bit by one are pretty low, actually. But not when they're moving in an orderly fashion towards you.
Right. Yeah, they could be getting your attention while one of them sneaks up on you from behind, for example.
Oh my god, I don't like it.
Yep.
So from here, we cut to the rest of the party finally making their way inside the theater. We see they go through a back alley and climb in through a window into the girls' bathroom. We're back in Mary's head again here, Matt. And I really like this moment where Johnny grabs onto her, and her assumption, and perhaps ours, is that he's doing that to, help out a girl. She says, cut the chivalry, I think. And it turns out here that Johnny is just an old man, and he can't see at night very well. And so he's grabbing her not to help her, but to get help from her. And Mary calls this an admission of humanity from him that she was very thankful to see.
Yeah, I like these little moments where our characters are sort of brought down to the human level and kept from becoming caricatures of themselves. I think it's
Yeah.
important to do that.
I think old people losing their night vision is one of the scariest things in the world, though.
Yeah, that's gotta suck.
I was having a conversation with my dad the other day, and he's just like, "Yeah, and when it's late and I'm turning into my neighborhood, I I can't see. I know the road's there." I'm like, Jesus, Dad, don't tell me
Oh
this.
my god. Oh geez.
Oh yeah, terrifying. I don't want to get old.
Yeah, me neither.
So as Mary prepares to climb into the window, into an abandoned theater in the middle of nowhere in Nevada, she is thinking. She's ruminating on herself and the changes she's undergone. And I love the writing here. Actually, now standing on the crate, she thought, the people who said those things really are ghosts because they're dead. Me as much as him being Peter. Certainly, the Mary Jackson who left this on this trip is gone. The person back here behind this old movie house, she's something new.
It's great. Yeah. I
Yeah.
really love this. And I was kind of thinking about this sort of thing anyway, even before she said this. And we've kind of talked about this a bit today, but specifically, there's a level of trauma where the person who walks away from it isn't really the same person anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Even if God were to intervene and save the lives of every character who remains here, um, their lives are still totally changed now. They've lost husbands, children, wives. So were they fundamentally, really saved? Was it them who was saved, or did they, did they die in the metaphorical sense that Mary Jackson is pointing out here? And I think that's something the book is also grappling with, because it's like God can save your life, but in some cases, what is that worth? It's
Yeah.
interesting to think about.
Yeah. I mean, I think a great example is David's friend, right? Like who was in a coma and almost died. Like,
Mhm.
did he come back the quote unquote same person? Um, has that experience changed him so fundamentally that he feels he's a different person than he was when he got hit by that car that day?
I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing I was thinking about is that, like, we never really got to see, like, was he just totally fine now? Like, did they ever talk about the fact that that he prayed to God and like and I'm fine. Like, I don't feel like, oh, the movie was plot hole. I kind of was left with that question of, like, did they did was he totally back the way he was, like magic?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the I don't think it goes into a lot of it. I do think there's this implication that he's going to make a full recovery, a shockingly full recovery.
Yeah, I seem to recall that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, just something I was thinking about.
Yeah. I also really like this. I mean, I don't know if this was intended, but like this as compared to the Ellie Carver transformation that happens at the very end of this chapter, like almost the metaphorical transformation of a new person to the literal one we see
Yeah,
at the end of the chapter.
yeah. I love that. I love that.
So Tom Billingsley in this moment, Matt. Quickly, we talked. I'm a little cold on him, a little disconnected to him, but this is one of the moments in the book where he got the closest to being elevated a higher tier in my mind here, because as he leads them into his alcohol den, we see this as a space that he clearly has some pride over, right? He talks about how he cleans it once a month, not like those damn kids. Like, they clean it. They brought in a porta potty to use. He decorates it. Like, we see this beautiful fish drawing on the tile of the wall that the book describes as almost miraculous. This drawing. This is a place where Tom practices his great shame, his sin, right? Alcoholism.
Mhm.
But it's also a place of great pride. He worships this place. He takes care of this place while using it as a place to not take care of himself. And I don't know, like it got me thinking about this idea of what is church, right? What is a church to a person? There's the literal, like, it's a place where we go to mass every week. But like, many people, like, I think the Bible talks about, this idea, or I don't think this is the Bible talking about this, but the idea that like anytime there are people of faith gathered in one spot, that's church. But also church is just, if you zoom out, is just a place where you go to get spiritual strength, or just center yourself, to focus yourself, to pray to whatever you believe in, but also just to find something in yourself a little bit as well.
Yeah.
And I like this idea of this place as Billingsly's church, and the irony of it also being a place where he's practicing his sin, and maybe a commentary on like the fallibility of church and organized religion as a thing. I feel like I'm reaching too far here, but I just this whole thing got my wheels really turning.
Yeah, well, I think there's something to that, because I actually don't think it's that much of a reach, because there's one other alcoholic character in this book other than, Johnny, which
Mhm.
is the priest, who David has been, spending time with.
Oh,
and
that's
and,
perfect.
and
I
he's
didn't
a
even think about that.
yeah, and he's a real ass, preacher. I guess he's not a priest, but he's a preacher
Yeah.
in a church, and he's an alcoholic. He's presumably drinking in the church. It doesn't say that he's not, anyway.
Hmm.
And so I think, I think Tom may be, struggling with some terrible thing that he did, or just struggling
Yeah.
with his soul, you could say. Maybe he's
Hmm.
not so much struggling with these profound questions of the nature of God, but his struggle is a spiritual struggle. He's struggling
Hmm.
with himself in a spiritual sense, and it's such an intense struggle that he's driven to drink. And but yet he also is this, fully human creature, capable of beauty and appreciating beauty and creating art and beauty. And so he can't help himself from painting these rococo fish and things on the walls. And I think that's, I think that's totally connected to the idea of what we're doing with faith, where faith and spirituality is hard, it's painful, it sucks.
Hmm.
The idea of being a spiritual person who also drinks is not a contradiction. In fact, it may
No.
be totally consistent. So
Yeah, no, I love that. I think you're so right. I also really liked the like when people are kind of admiring his artwork, he basically says, "Yeah, I was probably drunk when I did that," which is just like a way of kind of pushing. He doesn't want to take pride in that because it's wrapped up in the bad thing that he does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of, we haven't explored him near as much as we need to yet. But like I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but the moment where they're talking about, he when he got arrested by Intragian, he's like, I thought I just got drunk and did something bad, and he just says, I did something like that once, and like nobody nobody reacts to that at all, and it's like he got super close to like coming to an admission of his past, and it's just like everyone's like, anyway.
Yeah.
But there's definitely something going on with him, and this is kind of, we're entering his hideout, we're entering his world a little bit here.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it makes sense that we haven't learned too much about this character until now, because that was just kind of the part of the book where we were meeting this big group of characters, and we couldn't necessarily go into all the detail on all of them at once.
Yeah.
So it was fine that it just be like, okay, now we're being introduced to him. It's like, yeah, well, we've known him for many pages, but we're having his character, his proper character introduction. He's an alcoholic. He etc. Just all this stuff in here. I think it kind of makes sense actually to fill in these details at this point.
No, I agree. That he is we spent so much time with each of these characters on their arrival to Desperation, and characterized them, and then he was just kind of there. In fact, there are moments when I read this book the first time, and even on this reread, when like I confused him with Johnny, because like there's just like they don't know his name for a while, and it's like there's an old man in the cell next to David, and I'm like, oh, that's Johnny. We just haven't gotten to the part where like the timing is all messed up, and you learn, of course, that's not true. But it's just because he's just kind of there, and we don't really see much about him until right now.
Yeah, I think I also thought it was Johnny the first time we saw him in the cell. I was like, oh, I guess we're doing Tarantino here? No.
Yeah, yeah. So as they're here, they talk about the town, and they start to talk about if Kali and Trajan really killed everyone. Tom says that the population of Desperation is about 190 to 200 people, give or take, and it seems like Trajan is responsible for the deaths of just about everyone. But that's a lot of legwork, though. But we know it wasn't just Kali, right? Like, we know some of his animals helped, right?
Yeah.
A lot of these corpses that we've seen have spider bites, scorpion stings, snake bites. The animals of the desert have helped, and our characters even reason that. They say, "Oh, maybe the buzzards and coyotes helped," and they don't even fully realize how many of these animals that Entragian has on his side.
And just, we get it doesn't occur to us that we're surrounded by deadly, creepy crawlies at all times in the desert, because they're usually afraid of us and they stay away. But yeah, if they rise up and they want to kill everybody in the town, I think they could actually. I mean, it's funny. You could have written a whole horror novel, set aside the whole Entragian of it, and just have it be like all the creepy crawlies in a desert town decide they're tired of the people being there, and they just turn on them, and like that would still be quite a thing to have to deal with.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're totally right. So the other thing they talk about here, Matt, is why they survived. Why weren't they killed when everyone else was killed? David, when talking about this, compares it to, once again, to Passover, describing Entragian as the, quote, angel of death. And we got to talk about this a little bit here, Matt.
Yeah. So the angel of death thing, I think, is a really great thing to bring up here in this ongoing conversation about God, because the concept of the angel of death is such a wild idea. I distinctly remember being a kid watching the Ten Commandments and just being so deeply confused at the idea that God, the good guy of church, it was sending the angel of death, which was this evil looking hand that comes down from the sky in that movie. I don't know if you remember it.
I do not.
It's like a cloud. It's like a hand made of cloud, like black cloud, like reaching down toward the earth in an extremely creepy, like skeletal evil witch fashion. And you're just like, this is God. God is doing this. Like, can there possibly be a righteous justification for killing all the firstborn sons of Egypt with the angel of death? So that's the thing that God did. And so mentioning Entragian as an angel of death, I think, is a really fascinating idea, because you're like, wait a second, like, I mean, God sometimes does need to harvest the firstborn sons of Egypt.
Yeah, it certainly does seem to align Entragian with with God,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
In a way where you're like, wait, what? I mean, I agree with you. Like this story always really interested me, and I think the thing we should point out here, and I think it's important to say this, and I don't know we have, like, the God that we've really been reconciling and dealing with in the story so far is largely the Old Testament God, right? There have been very few, if any, New Testament references or stories in the book so far.
True.
Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I think I'm pretty sure that's true.
I don't think they're trying to remember even a passing mention. I mean, I think David says stuff like, in Jesus' name, amen. But that's kind of the only reference to Jesus that I can recall.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right that, like, modern Christians, they're Christians.
Yeah.
They talk about Jesus a lot.
Right.
He's like the main dude
yeah.
of this whole thing. And this is not Christian in that way. It is not about Jesus Christ and the teachings of Jesus Christ. It is Old Testament. It is old God shit.
Yeah, there have been a few times in this conversation where one of us said Christianity, and my brain kind of went like, well, kind of, and
yeah.
Also, and maybe a better word is just biblical, actually.
Yeah.
So
no, I mean, and again, this is things that, like, I don't think we know what to do with it yet. Like, we're just like, oh, this is really interesting. Like, what? And I agree with you. The story of Passover was always like, man, I get it, and I understand the importance of this day for Jewish people, right? But, like, this seems really harsh.
Yeah,
those kids didn't do anything,
right?
Because their dads were assholes,
right?
yeah, I mean, it just this is the cruelty of God, right? Like this is how it works. And like this is when you read the Old Testament, you have to come away with it with that opinion almost, because it's there, it's everywhere. It's not the only thing that you can attach to God, but it's part of it.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is the part that, it makes you wonder, like, is King intentionally ignoring New Testament stuff because it doesn't align with the things he's exploring with faith here, or is there something more going on with that? I don't know.
Yeah, I think we'll maybe see. I mean, it is just a whole entirely different can of worms to be like, and then we're going to also somehow reconcile the fact that God largely changed his mind about how he was going to treat humanity,
Uh-huh.
which is, it's just like I don't know what to do with that. So this is fine. Again, we might find out if the figure of Christ comes into this in any meaningful way as we go forward.
You said earlier that David says in Jesus' name. Does he? Are we sure about that?
I thought at some point he said, like, in Jesus' name we pray, or something, just when he's doing almost like as like an afterthought to one of his prayers that he says to himself.
Yeah, you might be right.
I'm pretty sure, but not 100%.
That's just really interesting. Like, I know when he says the prayer, when he says the prayer to scare the wolves away in this chapter, he says, "May the Lord bless you and keep you, and may the Lord make his face shine upon you." Now, that in modern Christianity, Lord is synonymous for the Lord God as well as the Lord Jesus Christ, right?
Yeah. Yes, but that's sort of because Jesus Christ and God are the same.
But kind of sort of,
and yet not. Yes.
yes and no. You're totally right. I just saw this. Please, David says, "Please protect me and help me do what I have to do. In Jesus' name I pray, amen."
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting because it doesn't, I'm not saying like it doesn't align with what we're saying, but it is just really, like, I guess my argument would be there, he's like rehearsing, like he's saying the words.
Yeah.
Like,
well, the way you just said it, and kind of the way King says it on the narration, because I do remember this pretty clearly, was like, "Jesus' name I pray." And it's like, it's perfunctory. It's not like honoring the name of Jesus Christ. It's like,
it's the way us Catholics say the Apostles' Creed, where we're just like mindlessly reciting these words that have lost all meaning.
You can say it in one syllable.
We believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church.
Yeah, exactly.
It is the wildest thing to just listen to lifelong Catholics recite this thing that they've said literally every Sunday for their entire lives, and it's just the words have lost all meaning.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that happens here is I think we talked a little bit about Tom and his kind of laying the I did something else thing here, but along with that, we have David point something out to Johnny that we maybe already guessed. I think maybe you already mentioned this before, but like, they were chosen, they were picked out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think the thing David notes here is that as he was standing there with Entragian, there were cars driving by. Those cars weren't stopped. Those cars weren't pulled over. Those cars weren't pulled into this. That Johnny was chosen by Entragian, chosen by God. Both. I think the one question that's not answered here is the why of it. Like, and the question I have for you is are we any closer to figuring out that why? And maybe this Tom kind of quietly saying, like, I did something like that once, hurt someone while drunk, could be one possible answer for that, since it occurs roughly at the same time. Like, we're trying to connect these thoughts, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I had the thought that whatever reason it is that Entragian has picked these people, Tom has some spiritual struggle having to do with having hurt someone. Maybe he killed someone. It's unclear, and maybe that's why. But again, it's funny. We really don't know.
Yeah. So back with Steve and Cynthia, they are on their way to the theater, and they they bump into someone else, Matt. We have a new character. We have Audrey Weiler, a consultant at the mining company and a survivor of Kali's rampage. When we meet Audrey, she seems like almost crazed, right? She's
Yeah.
like, I've been through a lot, been through a very traumatic experience, and she's kind of on the edge, and she bumps into these people. It is, by the way, absolutely destroying me that she is described as, quote, an older woman, 30 at least.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
This is, of course, coming from Cynthia's point of view, though, and she's very young, so that actually makes sense.
So far over the hill.
She is also the one other big thing we see here is from Cynthia's perspective is she is extremely deferential to men. Like she bumps into Steve, and Cynthia basically completely ignores Cynthia, and is just like, help me, man, help me, men person. And so what do you think about this character? What do you think about this character, and perhaps what we're doing with that the way Cynthia is just incredibly aware of her obsession and kind of help me, big strong man type nature.
Yeah. Well, definitely we're doing something in this space where we get characters like Mary, who is a strong-willed woman. We've got Cynthia who is very aware of the dangers of men and how you should not actually just trust them to take care of you, even though maybe she was inclined to when she was younger, but has learned the hard way not to. And then we have Audrey who just would love nothing more than to just kind of let somebody take care of her and get her out of the situation. And I think Cynthia is, the interplay here is Cynthia being like, hey, we're all going to have to get ourselves out of the situation. Stop looking at him, look at me. What's going on? Overall, not much to say about her yet, though. I was actually kind of surprised that we're introducing new characters.
That was what I was going to ask. Yeah. Actually, is this is halfway through the book and there's just this random new character here?
Yep.
Why?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a subtle, not so subtle. It's an indication that Trajan has not killed everybody. There could be other people around. We don't know. I mean, or she could be the last one. It doesn't particularly matter one way or the other. So,
yeah, no, I agree. Do you think there's any jealousy from Cynthia here? And I'm not saying this is the case. I'm just curious, like that her reactions to Audrey's like reverence of her man Steve. Is there any jealousy attached to that?
I didn't pick up on any of that. So
okay. So they all decide to head to the theater together, and then the group, Matt, finally gets together. We're here, page 372. The group is all together.
Finally, yeah. No,
we've done it.
It's good. We got there. Yeah.
I did really like. Speaking of the Johnny is an asshole club that we're all proud card carrying members of. I liked as he's helping her. Into the window, as helping Audrey into the window, her skirt rides up a little bit, and it just says Steve could see the boss helping himself to an eyeful. Even the apocalypse couldn't change some things, apparently.
And I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess just once again, he's being horny. It's I wonder. I guess we haven't seen any indications of horniness from the other male characters, but that's just because there are so few of them. And
yeah, I mean, I don't think Ralph is in a position to be particularly horny right now.
Yeah. David's a kid, and David's dad, I think, is just kind of faded into the background so much. He's
this is what I mean about Ralph, by the way, David's father.
Oh yeah, Ralph. Yeah.
Like where is he right now? Like he's here technically.
You saw me forget that Ralph and Tom are different characters just now, so that should give you an indication.
He's definitely here.
Yeah, he's
in the room.
He's with everyone. He's blended into the wallpaper. He's indistinguishable. Yeah.
We'll see more of him. Don't worry. His wife's about to become the bad guy. So
yeah.
There's plenty of more room for Ralph in this story.
Yep.
So Johnny leads the group into the theater, and to talk things over and plan their next move. And that's where we leave them behind. And from here, we cut over to our old friend Kali and Trajan as he drives back from the China pit. Or, well, we think it's in Trajan, Matt, but there is something almost immediately unusual about the way King is writing this section. He doesn't describe him as Kali and Trajan. He describes it as it, the dark shape, nothing specific. And that's, of course, because it's not in Trajan, Matt. It's Ellen Carver, a much larger Ellen Carver now with the thing that haunts Desperation having taken residence inside her. You kind of guessed this last week, Matt. So just want to give you credit for that. Nice work. What do you think about it?
That's great. I mean, I was like 50% joking about Edgar Bug, but it really does seem like some physical thing has crammed itself inside her body after exiting the cop's body, and that this is actually a thing. There's a creature inside of her. Like how this works, who knows? Is it like a goo, or is it more like an animal that is it something we're going to see and have to fight? And then a further question is like, why did this transfer have to happen in the pit? Because he drove her all the way there. Tangent, but I kind of like that it's called the China Pit, and I keep thinking every time I hear it that it's like somebody made a pun where it's like halfway to China, so like maybe it's like a super deep pit that's just remarkably deep, and that's why it's the China Pit. No one has actually said this. This is totally my like headcanon about why it's called the China Pit. But that would also explain why they found weird shit that wasn't present in the other mines.
Yeah, no, I like that. So Ellie heads back to the cell and finds all her prisoners missing. This is what we talked about a little bit earlier, that seems to indicate that she can't read the minds or even necessarily see through the eyes of her animals. That it would have noticed its guard coyote as dead before it got there, but it doesn't seem to. I love this line, Matt. After all, Ellen Carver was the only law west of the Pecos now. It was her job, and God help anyone who tried to keep her from doing a good one. Her former son, for instance. This is so rich and interesting because Ellen Carver is not the law. That was Kali and Trajan, but maybe there's part of Intrajan that has come along with this thing now.
Yeah.
Which means there's part of Ellie Carver in this thing right now.
Yeah. And also, calling David her former son is such an interesting phrasing, because it's not just like the creature that was the son of Ellie. It's this being is being
her former son.
Her former son. That we switch from calling this thing this creature into calling it Ellen Carver, and it's funny because like it almost seems like it doesn't know quite what it is. Like it's like there's some Intrajan in there, there's some Ellie in there, there's a lot of whatever this chaotic evil force is. I don't know.
I mean, just it was her job. It was her job to be the law west of the Pecos. So, and once again, the use of God here. It's like King knew every time he dropped the G word, it was going to be pointed and specific. God help anyone who tried to keep her from doing a good one.
I feel like I am being too literal here, but I do feel like the reference to the angel of death makes me just wonder a little bit, like, is this really an angel of death? Like, is this really a horrible monster that was actually sent by God?
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case, but it's possible, right?
Sure. Yeah. I think the book wants you to be asking those questions for sure.
Yeah.
So Ellen pulls out another sexy statue. It's not our sexy wolf one. This is a sexy spider. It then speaks the language of the dead, summoning a bunch of spiders to its side, which it then sends out, presumably to go looking for its missing guests. And that is kind of where we leave things this week.
Yeah. It made me wonder, like, do you think the reason why Intrajan is sort of the first host is because like he was the one who got this spider statue, or like I don't know. It doesn't really matter. It's just like the statues are obviously so important, that I just feel like it's got to have something to do with it, right? Where'd this come from, I guess? Anyway.
No, I like that. And I something you just said there is that Intrajan is the first host. How do you know that? How you know
Oh,
that?
good point. Good point. I don't
You
know
know
that at all.
that?
Or that there's only one host is another assumption, right? There's
Yeah, there you go.
that's one funny thing about this, like as a mystery, is I I find that I keep making assumptions where I'm like, well, there's no reason to believe, X, like that there's only one killer, for example, something we talked about previously.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
so
Yeah. So before signing off for the day, Intragian / Ellie Carver / whatever this thing is repeats its mission. Jews must die. Catholics must die. Mormons must die. Grateful Dead fans must die. Little Prey Boys must also die.
yeah,
So which one of them is the Mormon and which one of them is the Grateful Dead fan?
I don't know. Well, does he know about Steve?
um, I mean,
Uh,
probably I mean, good question.
yeah,
Has Ellie Tragian like linked up with her Timberwolf that tried to give Steve the sexy wolf statue? I don't know. We don't
I like Ellie Tragian. We're gonna go with that.
know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
I
I,
I do really like the last lines of this chapter though. Just as like an ominous note. It raised Ellen Carver's hands and began tapping Ellen Carver's fingers meditatively against Ellen Carver's collarbones.
it's such an interesting, yeah, creepy, delightful
Mhm.
sentence. Love it.
It's just like the ways in which we're kind of playing with the idea of this is not her, but is also her
Yeah,
still.
yeah. I mean, the feeling I got back when this thing was being Intragian is that it was almost like fading in and out of thinking it was Intragian versus
Hmm.
being some totally eldritch thing
Yeah,
that wasn't Intragian and knew that it wasn't Intragian. Um,
yeah, yeah.
so
Yeah, and so that is going to do it for us for the week. That is the end of the final chapter of part 2. As we mentioned, part 3 is titled The American West, which is the name of the theater and also a place in America,
yeah, a large place.
the West.
The scope and dimensions of which are unclear to me, honestly.
So what do you think, Matt? Part 2 over, part 3 beginning soon. Any idea where we're going from here?
No. I mean, they're going to try to get out of the town. They're going to probably not be able to get out of the town because if they could get out of the town, then they just would. And then they're
Mm-hmm.
going to have to confront this creature. I do kind of wonder if they're going to end up having to go down into the mine to kill whatever it is
Mm-hmm.
that is the source of all of this. Maybe destroy the statues, or maybe the statues are down there. Maybe there's something else down there.
Yeah.
Um, and probably a bunch of them are going to die horribly because that's how this goes. But
Yeah.
that's very. I First of all, I could be wrong about much of that, but also I feel like that's very sort of broad strokes. I don't really know where the characters are going. I
Yeah.
kind of feel like, well, I kind of vaguely know what genre this is, so I kind of know the direction things are headed. But that doesn't. I don't really feel like I understand where the characters are going or what we're doing thematically. I don't really feel like I know what we're doing thematically yet.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's great. I think that's an exciting place to be where you can maybe see the movement of the story, but not of the themes.
I mean, obviously. Okay, let me clarify what I mean. It's not like I have no idea, right? It's more like, is it, or are we? Is this humanity is shit and we all deserve to die and God hates us, or is this a if you have faith in God then He will like preserve you and or some
Why not both?
or why not, and sort of both. I mean, we're sort of gesturing at both actually. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I mean when I say I don't know where we're headed. Is
Yeah.
I'm like very unsure about what sort of flavor of this
Yeah.
we're heading toward.
The one thing I'll say, the cool thing, the choice to make Ellie Carver the next Intragian has a lot of very delicious, thematic stuff attached to it because
Yeah.
we talked about David and his unwavering, unshakable faith in God.
Uh-huh.
How will that be challenged when he comes up against his mother as the thing that he perhaps needs to defeat?
Yeah. True. I don't know.
Yeah, we will find out. Maybe not next week, but within the next few weeks, we will find out.
Yep.
All right, so that is going to do it for us this week. So we went on just an absurdly long amount of time, so we are going to elect to skip the reading of the discussion question answers this week. Last week's question was your favorite biblical reference, and I urge everyone to head over to the subreddit right now and read everyone's answers because I liked every single one I read. Really good stuff in there. The Bible is everywhere, as Matt said earlier in the episode. It's all over our pop culture, and it's worth taking a look at.
Yeah, please do. All right. So next week's question is so we talked this week about how the bathroom of the crusty old theater is perhaps Tom Billingsly's church, such as it is. What other unorthodox churches can you think of for different stories, for specific characters in those stories? And what does that choice of building or place say about that character?
This is a fun one. I like this.
Yeah.
It's gonna be cool.
I'm excited because like certain things do come to mind. Surprisingly, I feel like I'm surprised at how much fun this question is actually.
What's your church, Matt?
My church? Well, I like to go through this particular like grove of trees on my semi-daily walk. Not so daily now that the winter is here. It's in the
cold.
20s outside, but that's kind of a place that I like to recharge my nature cells, which are important to me as a person. Do you have a church?
Yeah, it's just church.
Oh.
No, I'm kidding. My wife and I go to church occasionally. We have not in a long time. Children, you know?
Yeah.
I would always say the movie theater was my church. Ironically, this is why this whole thing with Tom's church in the movie theater like pinged off my head, because like going to the movies, being in a movie theater, like is to me the same experience that a lot of people get from going to mass or going to service. It is a place where you can kind of get lost in your own thoughts by hearing stories or parables or ideas about other people and beliefs and morals and all these things. Movie theater, it's great.
Yeah.
All right, that's that. So we've answered the question already, and now you folks have to. Next week we will continue with Desperation. Part 3 will begin with the first 3 chapters of Part 3, chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Part 3. Matt, 3 chapters, 1, 2, and 3.
Okay,
just making sure.
I will try. All right, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or over on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit at r/doofmedia is a great place to answer those discussion questions. We do our best to just, took us a long time to get through the material this week, so we couldn't quite get to them.
Yeah, I never like when we have to do this, but it is literally midnight right now. This episode has to go up in 4 hours, and I haven't even begun editing yet, obviously, as I'm still talking right now. So we sometimes have to make calls for the good of the show, and this is one of those.
Both Scott and I have sick kids at home, both of us at the same time.
Both of us.
It's been a rough week.
I got quadruple pink eye.
Oh, God.
Both kids have double pink eye.
Oh, God.
And I'm like, there's a spider crawling on my back. My eyes are itching constantly to the point where I'm like, do I have it?
Oh, no.
Do I have it? So far, so good.
Yep.
All right. If you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, oh, come on, man.
It's too late, actually.
Stop it. Yeah. You can't even do it anymore. We won't let you.
Yeah. So never mind.
Moving on.
If you like any of our shows and you want to support us, then please consider donating on Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia before it's too late.
Yeah. We're shutting that down too. No more.
Yeah.
No more allowed.
Yeah.
Locking it off. Yeah. Don't forget to check out our episode on Creepshow 2. I listened back to that one as I was editing it, Matt, and it's a good episode. Yeah. It's a good one.
It was fun.
We had a lot of fun talking about that movie.
It's a pretty fun movie, actually, for being as dumb as it is.
It's not good, but yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
Of course, if you cannot afford to support us on Patreon, we totally understand. There are and continue to be a bunch of wonderful ways to help us out, just by sharing the episode, sharing the podcast as a whole, just talking about us when you talk about Desperation or the Dark Tower or anything. It's all great. And of course, you can always help us out by leaving us rating and reviews on Audible, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that reviews are accepted. This week's review comes from Rich Sin AZ, who gives us 15 stars and says, very well thought out conversation following along. They say, it's been a few years since reading the books, but listening to these guys analyze really brings it all back with the grandeur. Brings it all back with all the grandeur. Amazing breakdown for an amazing series. Well, Rich, thank you so much. That was very nice of you. That's so many stars. We will appreciate them all and love them forever.
I love being part of the grandeur. That's a beautiful thought.
It's grandeur of the Dark Tower that we are one very tiny little piece of.
Hell yeah.
All right, folks, we will see you back here next week for more Desperation. We're getting into it now, Matt. Here we go. It's the movie theater now.
All right. It's the movie theater. Finally.
Finally. Everything has been leading to this.
Yep.
Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.